My dear Alevi, I should doubtless have left these studies buried in the bound volumes of a review if some friends whose judgment I value had not thought that it would be a good thing to bring them before the notice of a wider public, as they serve to make better known one of the most singular social phenomena that history records. But it seemed to me that it would be necessary to give this public some additional explanations, since I cannot often expect to find judges as indulgent as you have been. When I published in the Mouvement Socialiste the articles which are now collected in this volume, I did not write with the intention of composing a book. I simply wrote down my reflections as they came into my mind. I knew that the subscribers to that review would have no difficulty in following me, since they were already familiar with the theories which for some years my friends and I had developed in its pages. But I am convinced that the readers of this book, on the contrary, will be very bewildered if I do not submit a kind of defense which will enable them to consider things from my own habitual point of view. In the course of our conversations, you have sometimes made remarks which fitted so well into the system of my own ideas that they often led me to investigate certain questions more thoroughly. I am sure that the reflections which I here submit to you and which you have provoked will be very useful to those who wish to read this book with profit. There are perhaps few studies in which the defects of my method of writing are more evident. I've been frequently reproached for not respecting the rules of the art of writing, to which all our contemporaries submit, and for thus inconveniencing my readers by the disorder of my explanations. I've tried to render the text clearer by numerous corrections of detail, but I've not been able to make the disorder disappear. I do not wish to defend myself by pleading the example of great writers who've been blamed for not knowing how to compose. Arthur Chouquet, speaking of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, said, "His writings lack harmony, order, and that connection of the parts which constitutes a unity." The defects of illustrious men do not justify the faults of the obscure, and I think that it is better to explain frankly the origin of this incorrigible vice in my writings. It is only recently that the rules of the art of writing have imposed themselves in a really imperative way. Contemporary authors appear to have accepted them readily, because they wish to please a hurried and often very inattentive public, and one which is desirous, above all, of avoiding any personal investigation. These rules were first applied by the people who manufacture scholastic books. Since the aim of education has been to make the pupils absorb an enormous amount of information, it has been necessary to put into their hands manuals suitable to this extra-rapid instruction. Everything has had to be presented in a form so clear, so logically arranged, and so calculated to dispel doubt, that in the end the beginner comes to believe that science is much simpler than our fathers supposed. In this way, the mind is very richly furnished in a very little time, but it is not furnished with implements which facilitate individual effort. These methods have been imitated by political publicists and by the people who attempt to popularize knowledge. Footnote: I recall here a phrase of Renan. Reading, in order to be of any use, must be an exercise involving some effort. End of footnote.